Let's take a closer look at some of the stories we're covering in Behind the Headlines. The New York Times reports on that appearance on Capitol Hill of US senior officials in connection with the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan, and their warning that al-Qaeda terrorists in Afghanistan could threaten the US in as little as 12 months. The Swedish activist Greta Thunberg has mocked Boris Johnson by quoting parts of his speeches on climate change and adding, blah, blah, blah. Britain's Evening Standard newspaper has more on Thunberg's speech at the Youth for Climate Summit in Milan. The Times newspaper has more on the conviction of sex trafficking charges of the musician R. Kelly, and one lawyer labelling him the worst of them all. And a right-wing French magazine has run a cover of an image of 5 ethnically diverse children with a xenophobic title to stoke anger against minorities. And my reviewers today are the broadcaster and journalist Lape Olarinoye and the French-Algerian journalist Nabila Ramdani. Thanks to both of you for joining me on the programme. Nabila, if we can start with you on Afghanistan, what stood out for you in today's Senate hearing?
Well, I think what this story tells us is that we live in an age when major government decisions are picked over at length and in great detail. And there is every reason why the Afghanistan disaster should be analysed as much as possible. And it's only a few weeks since withdrawal, but here there is already a mass of information instantly available about what went on. And here we have a defense secretary and a top US commander who are clearly being offered as officials who can show a bit of responsibility and start explaining matters, even though they will clearly be trying to put a gloss on these matters. The Defense Secretary, Lloyd Austin, is a Biden appointee, so I'm sure he will be arguing that the president ultimately took the right decision in ordering a complete withdrawal, despite the horror that it unleashed. And General Mark Milley will focus on the Trump administration and especially on Donald Trump's role as Supreme Commander of U.S. Forces, and it will be interesting to see if he tries to put the blame for what went wrong on the outgoing president while going easy on Biden. But we'll see. There are already firm indications that Milley does not think very highly of Trump. And I think that the August drone strike that killed Afghan civilians is sure to be the focus of the senators' questions, and I would hope that expressions such as war crimes are used to describe the slaughter of innocents, including children, and this very much happened during Biden's time in charge. So I hope nothing is done to try and swerve responsibility for what happened.
Yeah, a lot of conflicting statements and who knew what, a lot of finger-pointing. Lape, what did you make of all of it?
The tittle-tattle and the back and forth between the two sides of who does the responsibility essentially lie with. I think the real issue here is that people that were protected, were under the peacekeeping of the American army, are essentially now back to square one. Those are the people that the focus should be on, the poor Afghans that are now at the mercy of the Taliban. The Taliban, as expected, have gone back on their words. More people have died as a result of the Americans leaving and the Taliban taking over. So, of course, this inquiry must, like Nabila said, have those terms such as war crimes definitely used, and to understand what will happen next. The American army staying there for 20 years it has essentially done nothing for the people of Afghanistan. In fact, they continue to die. And so these are some of the questions I think should be at the forefront of this investigation. But of course, the focus will, as expected, will be on, whose fault is it? Who inherits this blame? Whether it was the Trump administration and what their plans were for the evacuation, and what the Biden administration has done about it. And we've already seen that back and forth continuing. And I do see that continuing, and there will be hardly any focus on the effect that it's had on the Afghan people themselves.
Yeah, devastating for them. Let's head over to this climate conference in Italy. Lape, what do you make of Greta Thunberg mocking world leaders with her blah, blah, blah comments?
There's a huge emergence of a climate change awareness, particularly among the younger generation, and we've seen that because Greta Thunberg has spearheaded this and she's championed this. But I think away from the rhetoric and the the comedic aspect of this, what she really is trying to drive home is the fact that many countries are speaking purely in rhetoric, and she focuses on the UK. I'm over here in the UK, I live in the UK, and I see the differences and the efforts going into the efforts to fight climate change. But yet we're seeing a whole load of different protests from different activist groups for climate change. But she focuses on the fact that a lot of it isn't actual change. It's in the future. It's rhetoric. It's the use of language and so on. There isn't actually immediate change. But there needs to be this understanding that actually climate change isn't something that has an immediate result. It's over time. It takes time for us to see the effect. But unlike other countries, the UK does have a lot of improvement. But I think Greta, of course, she is a huge champion and activist for this, will always see the need for improvement. And that's what she's done here by mocking the whole idea of change towards climate change here in the UK.
Nabila, do you think more young people need to be brought in by governments around the world to advise on climate change policy? It is their future, after all.
Well, I think Greta Thunberg has certainly done great things in raising ecological issues, and especially in telling young people how important they are. She is clearly a young lady full of conviction and indeed honesty, and she does what she thinks is right. However, I do think that mocking people and using non-language such as blah, 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 rather plays into the view that she's a bit of a naive youngster at times, somebody who's more interested in gimmicks and shocking people rather than someone who wants to argue over very complex and indeed very important issues. Greta was also using terms such as bunny hugger, which is what her critics call her. And this, of course, is in a way legitimizes such terms. So I think she would be much better off just ignoring this kind of infantile language and using speeches to set her own terms of reference and indeed her own agenda. And the amusing part is, of course, that Boris Johnson is notorious for making fun of people. Last week, he was putting on a mock French accent to tell the French to calm down after they lost that submarine deal with the Australians. So Greta is really just reducing herself to the schoolboy level of Boris Johnson, which is not a very wise thing to do. But beyond the knockabout fun, I think Greta's speech comes ahead of the COP26 International Climate Conference in Glasgow, which will see world leaders pursuing a target of limiting temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So I do wish her the best of luck in raising these issues.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about grabbing headlines, though, isn't it, Lape, and sort of using shock tactics, and she knows how to get media coverage. I mean, it must be incredibly frustrating for the younger generation. They feel like their voices are not being heard.
Well, yeah, that's right. They feel like their voices aren't being heard, which is where this element of shock tactics come in. Whether or not they're effective is a whole new debate, and I think it's high time that they propose, people that are young and who are passionate about climate change, as we all should be, it's really time that they propose, more realistic, effective strategies on how to get there and liaise with government on how to regulate these and push these through legislation, as opposed to, like Nabila said, just constantly say things for shock, for headlines, and to centralize it around her and her activism. I think it's high time that this is transferred, this energy, if you like, is transferred to actually legislation and actually incorporating that into governments and the way in which people live their lives all over the world, as opposed to having, very, very memorable speeches, if you like.
Yeah, I think we'll be talking a lot more about this in November when the UK hosts that climate conference, as you mentioned. Lape, Moving on, tell us a little bit more about the musician R. Kelly and why he faces the possibility of life behind bars.
Oh, tough one. 30 years coming, this case, of building evidence, of witnesses coming forward, of victims coming forward, of his said employees coming forward to build what it is, this case. And let's not forget, this all came to a boil as a result of the very popular documentary Surviving R. Kelly, where a host of his alleged, well, not alleged anymore because he's been found guilty, but a host of his victims, if you like, had come forward and expressed what they had been through during that time and after. And the reference point of Aaliyah, a very famous singer who was actually married to R. Kelly under the age of 18, forgery, racketeering, the string of trafficking, a lot of allegations being held against him. And the one that we're focusing on, that he has been found guilty, was just the federal charges. He still faces other charges in other states, like in New York and I think Chicago and so on. And so this has been a long time coming, and a victory for many, particularly those victims, those young women and two men that have had to bear the brunt of R. Kelly and have had to deal with what it feels like to be less than in terms of where you're dealing with someone in a position of power who can pay people and can make make the case in their favor. They've had to deal with victim blaming as well. So it's been a long time coming, and I think it's a victory for many people, the results. But of course, he is facing a long time in prison, but we don't know how long he'll get. It's between 10 to life, and we won't know that till next year in May, which, again, even the sentence in itself is a whole new level of argument for the lawyers and mitigating factors and so on. But I'm sure many of those victims will want to see the back of R. Kelly.
Yeah, I mean, Nabila, is there a danger, do you think, that when celebrity is involved, and this isn't the only case, but that the tendency is to believe the celebrity over the victims?
Yes, I mean, this, I'm afraid, is yet another case of a very rich, powerful and successful celebrity using his talent and good fortune to abuse other people in the most evil manner possible. But the facts rehearsed in court are extremely disturbing, especially when connected with somebody like R. Kelly, somebody previously associated with American R&B music and somebody who had millions of fans around the world. And instead of using his talent solely to bring joy to all these people, he preyed on the young and immature in a manner that was unspeakable. And the verdict is going to be appealed against, but evidence points to years of calculating and persistent abuse. And there is every chance that R. Kelly will spend the rest of his life in prison. I think one aspect that struck me particularly as particularly disturbing in the case is the way that many of his young victims referred to him as daddy. He was somebody who was seen as a loving father figure and yet used this position to carry out sordid crimes. And the only good part is, of course, that justice is finally being done. Police and judicial authorities are increasingly acting over crimes like these, even if they took place a long time ago and involved celebrities who were much loved. So that's a very good development for the sake of justice.
Yeah, and we will wait to hear on that sentencing in May next year. Nabila, moving on, tell us a little bit more about this French magazine that has run an inflammatory cover of ethnically diverse babies.
Well, it really is pretty grotesque that a supposedly civilized country like France can allow magazines to make fun of ethnic minority children in this manner. But I'm sorry to say that I'm not in the least a bit surprised. The great replacement theory is one developed by a racist Frenchman who effectively believed that the white race they respect is slowly being replaced by brown-skinned people who reproduce too quickly. And this, of course, refers to the subtitle used, or the headline used on that cover of the magazine, with the mocking title about these children, "Smile, you are great replaced." Now, this is a revolting theory, just the kind that would have been embraced by the Nazis. and yet it is spoken about openly in the French mainstream. And this is a country where there's another right-wing magazine last year depicted an MP from an African background as a slave in chains, while another household name magazine, I won't name, depicted a senior black minister as a monkey. And this is all passed off as Gallic humor, but it's one of the reasons why a far-right candidate came second in the presidential election contest in 2017 and looks likely to do the same thing in April next year. And France undoubtedly has a terrifying racism problem, and these kind of magazine covers are a symptom of that.
Yeah, Lape, stoking xenophobic fears, as Nabila suggested. What are your thoughts?
I'm neither surprised or shocked by this. This has been a long time coming. There's definitely hints of the colonial background on this. You know, France has colonized a significant part of Africa and the rest of the world, and to replicate diversity like this is not only not shocking to me, but also it's something that is ingrained in the society of France. This is not the first time, as Nabila said, that we've seen this kind of content or rhetoric coming out of France. And again, it's represented in the ballot boxes. We've seen the rise of the far-right parties coming in France. And this is why, because there seems to be a growing audience. But to use innocent children to depict this great replacement theory is not only shocking, it's actually quite disturbing and disgusting that this can be publicized and be read by millions of people across France. And I think it shouldn't be accepted, but it does speak volumes of that colonial nature of France, and it still rings true today. It's completely shocking, and I think there's nothing more to say about this. Anybody that you show this to, if they don't have utter shock and disgust for these kinds of headlines, then surely they must be one of the audience that this kind of headline is trying to target.
OK, we have to leave it there, but I want to thank both my reviewers today, the broadcaster and journalist Lape Olarinoye and French-Algerian journalist Nabila Ramdani. Thanks to both of you. That has been another edition of Behind the Headlines. Time for a sports update now. Samantha Johnson is here.